everyone. My name is Sasha Courville, and I'm the newly appointed chair of the ASI Board of Directors. Welcome, everyone, to the ASI AGM. We appreciate everyone is really busy, and we very much value the time that you're investing in ASI through your participation today. Next slide. It's an important custom in Australia to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands on which we meet at the beginning of a meeting. And we've added this as an important part of ASI meetings and events. So as such, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands on which we are meeting and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. For me, based in Melbourne, Australia, or NARM, I acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I extend these respects to any First Nations people joining us today. Next slide. We take antitrust issues seriously, and we've sent out our antitrust policy via a link out to you with the notice of meeting. Please make sure you're familiar with this. Thank you. Next slide. In terms of our agenda over the next 90 minutes, we're going to cover a report from myself as the board chair, a report from ASI CEO, Fiona Solomon. We will then have a discussion panel with ASI board directors, followed by an open Q&A session with the ASI Secretariat. So please be ready to share your questions. During the AGM, members have the opportunity to ask questions or comment on the items of business that have been tabled in the meeting notice. And we would love to hear from you. So if you represent a member and you wish to raise a question or make a comment, please use the Q&A box in Zoom. We have some IT support on this call who can offer advice if you are experiencing any issues. Just send a message in the chat for help. Next. ASI's membership is growing in scale and diversity. We now have more than 290 members, and you can see the representation across the screen. We'd also like to get a sense from where everyone is joining us today. So we'll start with a quick poll, and we'll allow a couple of minutes for people to be able to complete the poll, and we'll share the results. So while you're filling in the details, I am going to just provide a little bit of kind of context, I guess, in terms of the operating environment in which we have been operating over the past year and into this year, particularly around ESG, environmental social governance issues, sustainability trends. So we know that there continues to be a global move to align capital markets with sustainability goals. We also are seeing an increased focus on biodiversity and natural capital globally, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the session. There's also an ever-increasing focus on Scope 3 emissions and broader supply chain due diligence. And we're seeing ESG regulation pushing quickly into historically voluntary areas of assurance and disclosure, with Europe leading the world in this space. So let's see where we got to in terms of our poll results. There we go. So it's good to see a little bit of representation across Europe, Asia, a little bit North America, South America, Africa, and Oceania. Thank you very much for completing that. Next slide. The first item of business for the AGM is acknowledging the elected directors for 2023. It is the responsibility of the ASI board to play a stewardship role on behalf of members, making sure that ASI remains viable, focuses on the future, and thrives. ASI's board has a multi-stakeholder governance structure with 2 representatives from the production and transformation class, 2 from industrial users, and 2 from civil society, plus 2 independents, for a total of 8. Directors serve 2-year terms on a rotating basis, so nominations and elections by members are held every year. This year, we warmly welcome Catherine Aten, newly elected this year, and this is kind of, I think, her first actual meeting. So welcome, Catherine. We also welcome back Matthias Esdar in his re-election. Unfortunately, Matthias is an apology for our meeting today. And we welcome Pippa Howard for a further term as civil society representative. They join continuing directors Jan, Rosa, and Gerald, and independent directors Anita and myself. At this point, I'd like to thank Anita Roper, who has just completed a 2-year term as chair of the board steering the ship. We'd also like to thank Nick Madden for his service on the ASI board up until April this year, and we wish him all the best for an enjoyable retirement. I'd also like to acknowledge, next slide, please. I'd also like to acknowledge the Standards Committee members continuing in 2023. This is a very hardworking committee dealing with both the big picture of how to drive change with the fine detail of how to draft normative requirements and implementation guidance. A big thanks to the significant contributions of these committee members on behalf of the entire ASI membership. A special thanks needs to go to Anne-Marie Goodmakers, who has just stepped down from the committee after serving for 7 years. This is 3 times 2-year terms, including 2 terms as co-chair. And then she was appointed by the board for an additional 1-year term to fill a vacancy for civil society members. So we wish her well in her forthcoming retirement. The contributions of the many working group participants and the Secretariat to the work of the Standards Committee are also acknowledged. It's a really big job, so thank you. Next slide. The second item of formal business for the AGM relates to ASI's financial performance. A signed copy of ASI's financial statements and director's report, along with the director's declaration and the independent auditor's report, was emailed to members with the notice of this AGM. In accordance with Australian law, it is not necessary for members to vote on or otherwise approve these statements. They were circulated in advance of this meeting to give members an opportunity to review and consider them, and to be able to raise any questions or comments at this AGM. This slide that we're seeing right now reproduces the statement of profit or loss contained in the circulated financial statements for 2022. A few key highlights is that this is our 3rd consecutive year with an operating surplus. So starting from 2020, 21, and now 2022. And you will see the surplus that ASI achieved, which is 14%. So the budget for 2023, as you'll see in green, plans a deficit. And the aim is to invest the previous surpluses in line with ASI's strategy and to maintain our cash reserves target. Next slide. So this slide just covers a couple of the key reasons why we had a surplus in 2022. We continue to see strong growth and retention of ASI members. We also had a really positive currency exchange result for the year. And we've obtained new grant-related income for ASI projects with Indigenous communities. And this is all kind of wrapped around careful management of expenditure, with the vast majority of activity lines coming within that 10% of budget above or beyond. Next slide. So the next chart shows the growth in ASI's expenditure over the last 5 years, alongside the 2023 budgeted growth. So the headline in terms of the 2023 budget is that we're forecasting a deficit this year to be able to invest in continuing to deliver services for our members and drive sustainability outcomes for the aluminium value chain. This is largely through investing in our people, the Secretariat. As you can see from the slide, 2/3 of ASI's budget this year goes towards the Secretariat. As ASI's membership scales, and we're now nearing 300, our team needs to scale as well to support the implementation of our strategy. Since October, ASI has welcomed 5 new colleagues in IT, comms, and corporate governance. A new role in circularity starts shortly, followed by recruitment covering assurance and benchmarking. Project-related expenditure has grown in line with external grant income to work on capacity building with communities. Final note, travel fell sharply during the pandemic, as one would expect, and I think it's been the reality for many people. While this is slowly coming back, it is being consciously limited for carbon footprint considerations. So next slide. Our strategic focus continues to be on the key items on the slide on the left in black background. So our 4 sustainability priorities, the standards revision and rollout, data and research activities, and engagement and alignment. We've also listed key projects in 2023 in the middle part of the slide, and Fiona will talk to a few of these in more detail in her presentation shortly. The last part of the slide really just shows the breakdown of the 2023 budget. And as I mentioned, the vast majority of that goes to the Secretariat expenses. Next slide. For the past 7 years, ASI has conducted a governance survey of the board, standards committee, and members. I'd really just like to thank everyone who provided feedback. It's always a bit of a challenge to get that feedback, but it's really important. We really value the feedback, and it is taken into account at all levels in the organization to look at how we can continue to improve. A summary of the results of those surveys were circulated with the AGM notice, and we just wanted to highlight a couple of elements on the slide. A lot of feedback on the ongoing importance of continuing to update Elemental. We also have heard really clearly that members are keen to engage and learn and improve standards implementation. There's been really positive feedback on ASI's communication with some really great suggestions for how to continue to improve. It's very strong interest coming out of COVID for in-person engagement. And one of the responses to that is that ASI is co-hosting the Crew World Aluminium conference in London, very shortly coming up on the 16th to 18th of May. And we've heard about kind of an interest in stronger access to through multiple languages, so translations. We are investigating and working through the possibility for AI type translation options, and we'll be able to progress with that if we can ensure quality if and when. And an example of kind of hearing the feedback is that this year with this AGM, we have simultaneous translation in Chinese and in French. The board, just a quick note, the board reviews all the feedback in detail, and we use it to agree on priority actions for the year ahead. Next slide. Just before wrapping up, I just wanted to add a few comments on our 4 sustainability priorities and our role in ASI in driving change. On climate change, I think this is an area that we really have done a lot of work on, particularly with the recent standards revision and the work post that, to match increasing expectations and drive impact on climate. This is one that we can't take the foot off the gas. There will be a lot more work underway, but there is strong momentum. Likewise, there's been a lot of work on human rights, in particular the innovations coming out of the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Forum, which is really exciting. I think it's really quite world leading in many ways. From a nature positive perspective, that is an area, as I mentioned, will grow quite rapidly in terms of time, energy, and attention. And we need to continue to monitor and make sure that we are well positioned to play a key role in driving change there. The last one on circularity is one that we really need to focus in on. It is a critical need in terms of being able to respond to circularity, because it also helps us deal with climate change and biodiversity loss. And I think that last point really highlights the importance of thinking about the linkages between each of those 4 sustainability priorities, not thinking of them on their own, but looking at the connections and the linkages, and we need to ensure that our approach is an integrated one. I'd just like to remind everybody that you can ask questions at any time through the Q&A box on Zoom. We can answer those questions and anything else you'd like to ask or comment on during the directors panel and the Secretariat Q&A, questions and answers coming up. I'd now like to hand over to Fiona for the CEO report. Thank you.
Thanks, Sasha. So I'm going to talk briefly about ASI's strategy and how we're actually tracking against it, some of the key projects that we're working on, and the challenges ahead. So you can see from this slide, and Sasha mentioned those 4 key sustainability priorities: climate, circularity, nature positive, and human rights. And we organise our work towards these under some strategic pillars or some key work streams. So effective governance is one. Our board, our standards committee, this AGM are examples of our governance in practice as a multi-stakeholder organisation. The robust program is around our certification program, our standards and our assurance monitoring of impacts and so on as part of that. Driving change is where we're looking to take the outputs from those and move them towards those sustainability priorities. And beyond certification is looking at the stakeholders that are perhaps outside the implementation of standards and assurance, but the broader environment, the rights holders with which we're trying to engage our work as well. Next slide, thanks, Thad. So a few operational highlights under each of these. Effective governance, we launched our new versions of the standards last year. We've committed to a cycle of regular guidance updates and revisions, but underneath that work is a whole bunch of consultation, consensus building, decision making that has a balance of interests at the table. And so that's really key. That's work that's continuing all the time as we look to deliver this work program around our standards and guidance. Sasha's talked about that we have good financial resilience from a corporate governance point of view, and we're also now starting to review the legal risk to ASI as we start to see litigation and other things come towards standards and assurance programs like ours. Under robust program, we've got a strong focus on digitisation with the various online platforms that we use, how we start to integrate those and bring those together. So that's a big area of work, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a bit later. Assurance integrity remains a really big priority for us. We've continued to grow our team of people who do the work of oversights of audit reports that are submitted, accrediting and training auditors, witness assessments that observe audits that are taking place on site, all to try and have a systems approach to ensuring quality and rigour. Our training of auditors takes place through Educational, our online learning platform, and we also have member-facing modules there as well. So if you haven't checked those out, I do encourage you to do so. They're regularly refreshed with new material. We also deliver member support. If you have a question, if you're looking for clarification on an issue, there's a lot of work that happens in that space as well, all to try and, again, create this outcome of a robust program. Under driving change, we regularly publish data and research insights that are trying to look at, well, how are we contributing to the change that we want to see? But also, are there any gaps that we need to be aware of, where we need to improve or do better in some areas? We prioritise different partnerships with organisations that we can collaborate with where we have shared goals. And a key one of those is working with the finance and investment sector due to the key role that they're playing in sustainability-linked transitions. And we're seeing the emergence of other frameworks and so on that we've got to really understand how our work can link in with those broader investment sector directions. And finally, with Beyond Certification, our Indigenous Peoples Advisory Forum, or IPAF, as Sasha mentioned, there's some really important projects and activities happening within this space. We're directly doing work on capacity building with communities that are affected by upstream in the aluminium value chain, and we're creating a pipeline of local registered specialists from amongst our IPAF network that bring both their traditional cultural knowledge and marry that with training and knowledge that we can provide about the aluminium value chain and ASI processes. Next slide, thanks. So a few operational highlights in numbers. In 2022, we had 72 new members join. So this ASI community of ours continues to grow. And we see that with growing engagement in our online webinars, the number of users that we have registered in Elemental, our online assurance platform, and participants in working groups. We have 5. They match up with the sustainability priorities that we have, plus 1 on standards benchmarking and harmonization. So if that's something that you're interested in, that you would like to contribute to, then do please get in touch with us. We also had new certifications in 2022, 75 new ones for both the performance and chain of custody standard. But if we go to the next slide, those new certifications are just the tip of the iceberg, if you like, in terms of the assurance work, this assurance portfolio that we're managing as a whole. There are also surveillance audits within the certification period, recertifications, scope changes where members seek to add new facilities or operations to an existing certification. So this chart shows the number of audit reports that have oversights completed each month, starting back from January 2020. So you can see this trend line, increasing over time. In the last few months, we have seen a little bit of a slowdown, and that's due to the quality control that we're now needing to do as we transition over to the new versions of the standards, the 2022 standards. Effectively, we're seeing a learning curve for members and auditors on these new versions. So it's quite important to pay attention to what those new requirements are. And we recently published an article on what some of those particular sticky points are that we're seeing. So as a team, we're trying to capture those gaps to drive learning right back through the system. Next slide, thanks. One of our important member-facing projects, and Sasha highlighted this from the governance survey feedback, is Elemental. So we're currently building Elemental 2.0, and it's a real priority for us this year. Our current platform host, NAC, has created some painful issues for us and for all users. And so we're now rebuilding the whole thing on a new platform that we can fully manage in-house. So we're going to recreate the existing workflows, bring across the data that's within the system, and also start to work on faster speeds and a better user interface. So you can see a little sneak peek here about the kind of direction that we're heading in. We're building in some functionality improvements up to the launch, but we're going to keep going on that work beyond the launch as well, because our wish list is quite long and aspirational. We want to have the new 2.0 Elemental ready by year end, we hope, to launch, but we are still running our existing Elemental platform in parallel. So we're flying our current plane, we're building a new one alongside, and we're at the moment on track to have this ready by the end of the year. Next, thanks. So a second member-facing work stream is our ongoing cycle of standards and guidance updates. And they're really designed to, particularly on the guidance front, enhance implementation support for you as members. The performance in the chain of custody standards, the guidance with the most recent updates we've had with that were just last month. So you'll see those now have a 0.1 in their title. For the standards themselves, the changes are pretty non-substantive. They're mainly clarifying a few things where we've had some questions or some corrections for a few things that slipped through the cracks. So that's being rolled out right now in Elemental, our current Elemental. In terms of the guidance, there's some new content in there, and then there's been a lot of work done in the last year to enhance the flow within these documents and the linkages between them. So we really welcome your feedback on whether they're helping and giving a better kind of foundation for this implementation of the specific criteria. The claims guide is a new version, not a decimal point version, and there's a lot of detail in there now, extra detail about the types of claims that can be made and how, and also when non-members can leverage on product claims, for example, when they're passed on by a chain of custody certified entity at the end of the supply chain. So we actually held a 45 minutes on session on the claims guide yesterday, and so if you missed it, the recording will be available. Next, thanks. So are certifications driving change? Well, last month we published the second analysis of data that we continue to collect through our ongoing survey of certified members. So far, we've had 70 respondents to this survey. And in there, we have a question about what sort of changes are there about as part of the certification process. And the respondents showed that we had nearly 80% had either already made changes or have them in progress as a result of ASI certification. And in that pie chart, you can see these happen both before and after an ASI audit takes place. So just from this sample of survey respondents, we have at least 50 ASI members that say they have made sustainability-related improvements as a result of ASI. And we should be able to expect this to even increase with the step up to the new standards. Next, thanks. Decarbonisation, such a critical area for change and one of our 4 sustainability priorities. Now we know that most emissions in the aluminium sector come from the smelting process, and the new performance standard requires emissions reductions along 1.5 degree aligned pathways for smelters, but also for everyone. But for smelters, we know from CRU data that 17% of the world's smelters are now ASI certified. And this chart aggregates emissions data for those certified smelters from the last decade, so from 2012 to 2022. In that 10 years, there was a decrease in emissions intensity for those certified smelters, about a 12% drop for the production weighted average. But at the same time, the overall amount of primary aluminium being produced has increased, along, of course, with the associated emissions. So if we're talking about emissions intensity, the change pathway at a smelter level is clear. For high emitters, it's firstly change the power mix. For lower emitters, though, new technologies need to be developed and implemented. But what really matters for mitigating climate change is total emissions. This is a huge challenge when the demand for aluminium is actually growing, even if that metal is being used to decarbonise other sectors. For the world to stay below 1.5 degrees, the aluminium sector, it's been estimated, has a carbon budget of around 15 billion tonnes of CO2. And if we continue with business as usual, the sector is actually on track to hit this number in less than 10 years. So in this chart, we can see some change. But bigger picture, the change agenda here, it's urgent, it's deeper, and it's capital intensive. Next, thanks. So what are the key challenges facing us in ASI? Well, firstly, the goalposts continue to move. We've moved them with the new version of the standards, but we're doing that because there are growing stakeholder expectations around performances and practices. And there's an increasing urgency around the sustainability challenges that are facing us. At the same time, there's a growing skepticism. Can voluntary standards really be trusted? Can they really create change? Are they just working with a niche set of performers that are already at the level of the standards, so we're not really seeing very much change? Or in a more inclusive program, are they bringing in, a broader suite of operations and companies that have legacy issues? And so are the kind of the assurance processes really addressing these, or is this just another form of greenwashing? There's growing expectations around transparency. This has been a long theme, but we see the expectations around disclosures directly from companies, through assurance, through what gets published in audit reports, in findings from auditors, in other kinds of disclosures. Is there enough detail? Can stakeholders really deeply understand what their issue is? And transparency about supply chains, the flow of material, the parties and the counterparties that are engaged within that. And all of this is adding up to a lot of scrutiny from customers, from regulators, from civil society, from media. And we should expect, we are seeing that even good faith efforts to improve are going to be seen by some as not good enough, or not fast enough, or both. So for all standard systems, increasing credibility through more checks and balances, more communications and reporting, faster evolution, does draw on the time and resources of all stakeholders, of all of us. So ASI's challenge here can really be summarised as the need to keep listening, to keep improving, but also to be prioritising where we can invest our limited resources. And as members of ASI, this is a shared challenge, how we can address the evolving expectations and opportunities in this increasingly complex landscape. And there are no easy answers here. There are no step change solutions towards perfection. Next, thanks. So while we've talked a bit about ASI's strategy, let's remember, and I don't know how well this will translate, but culture eats strategy for breakfast. This doesn't mean that strategy is not important, but rather that an empowering culture is really critical to success. So in ASI, we've been focusing on our team culture since 2020. We want to be flexible, we want to be innovative, but we want everyone in our team to take responsibility for results. So there's 4 key elements to our strategy in ASI, to our culture rather, in ASI. We want to have great colleagues. We want to have a culture of candor. We want everyone to lead with context, no matter where they are in the organisation. And we want everyone to act in ASI's best interest. And that last one is actually in common with anyone who's part of our governance, to be acting in ASI's best interest, to be finding a collective, shared common ground amongst the many stakeholders that are part of this broad community. So finally, I'd like to give a big thanks to the ASI team, which is my last slide, thank you, who is shown here like quite busy bees, and everybody is working really hard towards the mission and vision of our organisation. So sincere thanks to everybody for your passion and commitment to ASI's success. So we're going to turn now to our session on strategy and bring in our directors for a panel discussion. So everybody on the board, if you can turn on your cameras and get ready for your audio. I'm going to start looking at some of the Q&A that might be coming in, but again, please share your questions with us that we can put to the board. But I'm going to try and get through as many questions as we can in the time we have. If there's any that we can't get to though, we will look to respond to those in a future member update. But I'm going to kick off with some questions to Rosa, Catherine and Gerald. We've talked a little bit about the climate urgency, how upstream and downstream can move towards a 1.5 degree future. Within that, within the work that the industry and others are doing, what do you think is ASI's role? And Rosa, we might start with you.
Thank you, Fiona, and good morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. Can you hear me well? Yes, okay, great. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, the big differentiator of ASI is that it is a multi-stakeholder initiative. So the main role that I value in ASI is this ability to keep the connection with different stakeholders, to understand the expectations of different stakeholders in real time, as there are very frequent exchanges, and to serve as this discussion space that brings together the industry with different stakeholders representing civil society, but also representing users of aluminium, consumers, the financial world, and any other. So in this space, understanding what are the solutions, what are the coalitions, what are the partnerships that are possible and that are needed to deliver solutions aligned with this 1.5 degrees target that we have set for ourselves is, in my view, the critical contribution of ASI. And the ability to bring this into the standards to the standard setting committee, but also the ability to, for anybody interested in this matter to participate through the climate change working group, I think it is, again, another important differentiator. So in summary, multi-stakeholder ability to be connected in real time to different stakeholders, keeping the expectations well understood and shared within the community of aluminium, of the aluminium industry, and this ability to foster deliverables and to foster coalitions, partnerships, or whatever to get there faster and in a sustainable manner. That would be my summary.
Thanks, Rosa. Catherine?
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Today, actually, there are quite a few initiatives to look at this 1.5 degree pathway for the aluminum industry. So the question is, how ASI fits into this kind of big framework of different initiatives from the financial community with the CAF. You have also initiatives from the industry trade associations. But I see a very specific spot for ASI to be successful, in particularly with the definition of the methodology, which is what somehow we're all looking for, which would really be able to integrate the whole value chain into this pathway, because we've had several information on several pathways, but mainly concentrated on the primary sector. And here we're really looking at the whole value chain. So I see really a specific spot in a sense that ASI is bringing a methodology to define this methodology, which is some proposals, some hard work on looking at what's there. So it's really a process somehow that ASI is offering with a community of people who are engaged. And I encourage more people to get engaged into this working group. And from the initial working sessions that have already happened, I can really see something coming out of it that will really work for the industry in terms of this 1.5 degree pathway.
Thanks, Catherine. Gerald?
Yeah, actually building on what Rosa and Catherine said, I think for me, the most, obviously we need that methodology, we need that stakeholder involvement. For me, the big step change is that basically to have this 1.5 science-based target roadmap as an ASI requirement, as a requirement in the performance standard. For me, that's really the critical thing. And if I understand correctly, the method, at least for large part, should be finalized this year, which means that by 2025, that is a hard requirement. And that is, I think that's for me, personally, I think it's probably the most important role of ASI, that this is a hard requirement for certification. Because if we look in the overall scope of things, also looking outside of the aluminum sector, when I look at science-based targets, there is a lot of commitment in the downstream, but much less in the upstream. But basically, most of the major emissions are coming from the upstream. So there, I think, to link this and have this available and as a hard requirement, I think that's a fundamental role of ASI.
Fantastic. Thank you. So turning now to the topic around nature, and the focus on nature is really increasing. Of course, it's interrelated with climate, it's interrelated with all of those sustainability issues, really. So Pippa and Sasha, a question to you both. We know that the Task Force on Nature-related Financial Disclosures, the TNFD, has just published its final framework, and that's about the nature-related risk management and disclosures that companies will increasingly be expected to do. What do you think are some of the implications for ASI and its members? Pippa, did you want to go first?
Yeah, happy to go first. Thanks, and hello to everybody from Cambridge. Thanks, Fiona. It's a really great question. This is something we really all need to think about and we need to respond to. For ASI, we need to ensure that our standards and what we're all signing up to with certification is aligned to these types of nature-related disclosure frameworks. And also to realize that this one isn't on its own. Actually, there's a big corporate sustainability reporting directive in Europe, which is asking for exactly the same thing. And this too is responding to that big target 15 that was set up in Montreal in December last year at the Global Biodiversity Framework Agreement. And it's certainly going to be a bit of an unknown to many of you, but we hope that through the commitments and the actions that you've made towards compliance with the ASI standards, that you're already on the path to being able to be in a position to disclose your nature-related risk. Some of you may be asking, where to start and how to define nature-related risk in the first place, or what does materiality mean to a company? There are lots of terms that perhaps in this nature space particularly are a little bit unfamiliar, but we need to define this, and we need to know how to measure it, because there is a requirement to show an indication of measurement, but also how to make sense of collating what is likely to be quite complex data into a sensible form that will be understood by both, you know, colleagues in the company, but also those who you're disclosing to. And I'm sure Sasha can speak to that a bit. But to be fair, what the TNFD is asking for is really for you to define where your operations are, and to understand the footprint of your supply chains, which is a sort of new thing. But actually, as a chain of custody, you know, certification scheme, we're in a really good position as ASI. And we should have some of that traceability, and certainly the site of up and downstream footprints and the responses to biodiversity that each part of the value chain is reporting on. What we need to now get our heads around really is what this means in terms of nature-related issues, and whether this is material to our businesses or not. And, you know, will the impacts affect other entities' dependencies? Will we experience nature-related risk that might affect our operational performance and sustainability? How are we integrating nature into all of our decision-making? And are we actually contributing through our management actions to a nature-positive outcome? And, you know, it's fantastic to see that this is such a sort of strong pillar within the whole mission and strategy of ASI, and I think we're in a really good position. Thanks, Fiona. Those are my initial thoughts.
Thanks, Pippa. That's great. And Sasha, you're coming from the finance sector. How are those linking together in your space and thinking of ASI as well?
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just kind of build on Pippa's comments. I think there's a real opportunity for ASI and its members to really contribute to shaping how the world views and integrates and understands and implements kind of the TNFD. It's coming, and I think it's incumbent on us. There's an opportunity for us as a key vehicle for driving positive change to really be able to take the opportunity and shape the implementation of it. Just to give context in terms of timing, it took the global community, including the financial sector, about 10 years to develop the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And what's been done with the TNFD, the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, has happened within about 2 years, right? So it's going fast, even though it's more complex. There's lots of different things that you can measure in terms of different kinds of assets, and not just one core metric to really focus in on. But it is moving and it is coming. And part of the reason it's been able to go so fast is it's leveraged off of the framework of the TCFD, which thankfully makes it a little bit easier for businesses that are trying to implement it, because they can leverage the same frameworks and tools and systems that are in place. But as Pippa mentioned, I think it's really set up as a starting point to really understand impacts and dependencies. That's place-based and through the value chain. I think the next few years, I think, is going to be a real opportunity for organizations to pilot the work, even though that there's been a lot of pilots going on in the beta versions of the framework. That's still going to happen. And that's okay, because everybody's going to need to get a sense of the key data sets. That will be a challenge in the initial stages, but that will fill out over time. And baseline, just to understand current kind of impacts, dependencies, where we're currently at, how do we understand starting points to then be able to build out future plans and set those targets that align with the nature positive targets that governments have been setting. So I guess my key, it's coming, it's going to come fast, and there's a real opportunity for ASI and members to play with it, to work on how to implement it and to shape how the global community really responds to nature through using this tool, and then looking at the alignment with ASI standards and the broader kind of frame and, I guess, toolkit for impact that we have.
Thanks, Sasha. So we've had a couple of questions, but I think some of these are a bit more towards the Secretariat, so we might save those for the Secretariat panel. So I'm going to turn to Jan and Anita to ask, to talk a little bit more about what good governance means, for people to understand the role of the board, the role of governance within ASI and more broadly. Jan, did you want to go first and then Anita?
Yes, thank you, Fiona, and hello to everybody from the Netherlands. As we all know, it's not only culture which eats strategy, it's also good governance which eats strategy. And we as a board have an important role to play with ensuring that the good governance rules are being applied by us all, and also within the ASI activities, which means that the activities are run in a transparent, accountable, and inclusive manner. Those are the three key words you may use for that. And I've elaborated a bit on it on the basis of key principles which we apply when we look at those three words. First, we have to establish clear policies and procedures. Good governance requires the establishment of policies and procedures that guide decision making. We have to ensure that there is good leadership. Now, we only have to look at all those people working within ASI to know that we've done a good job there. Promoting accountability and transparency. This involves regular reporting to all stakeholders, including members, partners, other stakeholders about the organizational performance, activities, and finances. And today is a good example of that part of being transparent, which ASI is showing. We also need to ensure, and I as a finance person think that's utterly important, is that there are sound financial management policies and practices in place. We have to ensure that we comply with legal and ethical standards. And last but not least, we have to ensure that there is a good stakeholder engagement. This involves actively engaging with all stakeholders, including members, partners, and other interested parties, to ensure that their views and perspectives are heard and taken into account. And now I would like to ask Anita to continue with the question.
Thanks, Jan. It's very hard to follow you, and greetings from Melbourne, Australia, but that was a great comprehensive list that Jan's just put forward. So I'll be brief and just try and not repeat what he said. Couldn't but agree with everything he said. At the heart of any successful organisation are those three principles of transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness. But for me, as a multi-stakeholder member-led organisation for ASI, this means good governance means having clear and transparent decision-making processes. That what we need to do is ensure all members can participate, regardless of where they're located, their size, what they do, what part of the value chain they're in, but they have that ability. That's what I think is one of the things that's really important. And that means that we need to have a commitment of inclusiveness and diversity as an organisation. That's having the processes that not only enables all points of view to be heard, but all points of view to be taken into account and valued. And that's important, even if they're different from our own. And we heard from Sasha how we've done 7 surveys over the years to try and listen and hear what our members want, and then how we've tried to then process and make changes to ASI as we've grown based on what we're hearing from our members. And we can only do that if we actually hear from our members, and we can only do that if you tell us what you want and what you need. But of course, this also only works if we have effective leadership in the organisation, and leaders who set clear expectations and goals and communicate them openly. And as Jan said, ensure that we have the right resources and systems. And as Fiona said, then that we prioritise those resources in an effective way. And then I think the other important point that Jan made that I would just like to reiterate in terms of good governance is the importance of ethical and responsible behaviour amongst members, because it's very important for the board to have oversight, but it's also, in terms of good governance, really important in addition to oversight for the board to have insight and foresight. I think they're also very important roles for a board, because for a board, it requires a willingness in terms of good governance to embrace change, because we have to anticipate the challenges that are in front of us. We have to identify the opportunities for growth and innovation. So for me, good governance also requires a commitment to ongoing learning, to continuous improvement. It means listening, taking on board the feedback. So just to try and summarise and bring that together, having a strong governance framework allows ASI to anticipate those changes, identify opportunities for growth, build on innovation and achieve its mission. So with that, I'll hand back to Fiona.
Thanks, Anita. So one of the questions that's in the Q&A, which I can also ask to the Secretariat, but I'll put to the board, is how can new certified members engage more with ASI? How can they align with ASI's strategy and our initiatives? Any thoughts from anyone on the board?
Maybe I can answer.
Perfect, Catherine, please do.
I would start with the working groups. I was mentioning earlier the greenhouse gas working group working on this 1.5 degree pathway. The objective being to have obviously a science-based target, science-based pathway that would then be the reference to which each member would refer when they go through the certification. So this work is really critical, and this is open to all of you to participate. So that's an example of how new members can engage working groups, and then obviously throughout the governance system, look into standards committee participation through election. But and I'm sure there are some others, so I'll let others answer on this.
Yeah, Gerald here, I think generally, yeah, it's just engagement, and probably also bring a wider team within the company, the stakeholders into the working group to learn, but then also to engage actively. So it's just engaging and doing it, and let's say maybe not waiting for somebody else to ask. To get asked to get engaged, but I think it's open for all the stakeholders.
I'm happy.
Yeah, maybe. Oops.
Please go.
Sorry. No, I was going to say that in addition, what I would suggest is make the most out of ASI internally. It has such a power to engage employees. So if your executive team is convinced that ASI is the right path forward for the industry, for the company, in this case, make it a topic internally. So we use it a lot in internal town halls. We make it the theme with customers, with employees, even in our communities as they participate in the audits. And it really has a potential to bring people together for a better industry. So yeah, I think it has to start with a decision on how relevant is ASI for the company, and then start engaging your own people, and then from there obviously you can engage as Catherine and as Gerald were saying, with through the governance process and the different working groups and different groups that are working to make it better.
Thanks,
Thank
Marisa. Pippa?
Yeah, just a final thought to sort of build on that is that actually the multiple functions within the company that really should be contributing to. So it shouldn't just be a sort of single member representative who can get involved, because as Catherine says, there's lots of different working groups. There are lots of layers within the company, and it's not just, the climate specialist or the sustainability specialist. It actually affects everything. It's procurement, it's the finance, the decision, it's around governance. All of these things are really about the entire company's performance, actually, in a space that is rapidly changing. So the more your company can get on board and actually can participate in an active way, the stronger ASI will be, but also the stronger your company will be in its response to the standards and in the whole sort of, and the awareness of the full value chain too. So yeah, and I mean, I started on one of the standards committee and have really learnt an enormous amount, and it's sort of built my knowledge of various aspects of the whole aluminium sector.
Thanks, Pippa. And I'd also add we have regular webinars, ways in which to engage and ask questions, even if you don't want the formality of participating and the work associated, as was mentioned by Sasha, about being on the standards committee or being in a working group. There's ways to engage and ask questions through those forums as well. Another question that I have for the board, perhaps our last one before we start the Secretariat panel. Do you think that ASI is for leaders or for followers or for both?
I can give it a try, Fiona.
Thanks, Rosa. Please do.
I think this is also an important decision that ASI took time ago, and is that ASI is for all the companies to improve step by step to get better. So it doesn't mean that the lowest common denominator can get an ASI certification, but it means that we're trying to lift all the boats at the same time and not leave companies behind. And this is very important because it's not a leadership standard only for the top 3 that we would know already who they are, even without the standard. This is really to bring change to the industry, and it's a deliberate decision that the board made years ago. And from my perspective, is the right one. So definitely it is for all.
And maybe just building on that, I also think, it's much more important to move a big chunk of the industry in that right direction than, singling out a few leaders. So I think there should also be that point of differentiation, but that's then anyway happening on the market. But, better to target 80% and improve them than to target only 20%. Where you have, let's say, the green corner. It really has to be, it needs to continuously move the whole industry forward.
Pippa?
Yeah, just a thought on that. I think it's I guess a question that can reflect back in actually what's the role of ASI too. Sort of who should be part of the membership, but actually ASI is. One of its jobs is to kind of look down towards the horizon to see what's coming towards you as members and actually help you to manage and address those things in a very timely and hopefully preempt things that may become risk to your companies. So it doesn't matter where you are on the sort of trajectory of being sort of the strongest leaders or kind of just trying to keep up with everything. There is only one can only learn and actually be sort of, actively engaged. So ASI's role, I think, is to create leaders as much as to enable those leaders to continue to perform. So I think there is an interdependency there that we shouldn't forget.
Thanks, Pippa. So I might hand over to you, Sasha, to take us into the Secretariat panel, but I wanted to thank everybody on the board for a really great discussion and for your contributions to ASI in that board role as well. So thank you. Sasha, over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. If all the directors can turn their video off, and if our Secretariat colleagues who are joining us for the panel could join us, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Wonderful. So this is now an opportunity to ask practical questions about ASI matters to the Secretariat. We have team members with us on the panel who work on standards, assurance, partnerships, membership, the investment sector, and risk and strategy. So please keep those questions coming along in the Q&A box. We do have a few that we might start off with. and then we'll keep moving. I have lots of questions. We won't run out of questions, but we'd prefer to answer your questions than mine. So please keep those questions coming in the Q&A function. So maybe one question. Well, it's actually a comment to start off, and but I think there may be a response that the Secretariat would like to provide. So this is for future changes in standards and guidance. ASI should publish a detailed and comprehensive change log, spelling out and listing every change in the documents. Ideally, for each entry, a justification/rationale should be offered to help and assist correct implementation. I'm wondering, Chris, if that's one you might like to respond to.
Sure thing. Thank you very much, Sasha. Thanks for the question. If you think it's challenging externally to keep a track of these things, you should try it internally. In our last public consultation round, dealing with those, thousands of changes was kind of challenging, especially, this was mentioned before, as more people get involved with ASI systems. How do we track those? How do we articulate those changes to an increasing sized cohort and a differentiated heterogeneous membership? Well, our approach actually, especially as we go through these much more regular guidance changes, is we are looking to transition from a document-based approach to a data-based approach using an information management system. And currently we're trialing that internally to track exactly those changes. And I think you can expect over the next couple of years for us to start to introduce those externally. I say over those couple of years because there are lots of changes processually that are going on, and there's a prioritization process that is required. I can tell you now that the system we are trialing, it feels like Wikipedia. So if you were to go onto a Wikipedia page today, you can see what's written on that page today, but you can also mine information on how that page has changed over time. And that's the kind of system we will be looking to introduce that allows you, the user, to see the kind of changes that were made and indeed link those to decisions by the Standards Committee and ultimately the board. It sounds easy to implement. It's not so easy to implement. We do rely in the meantime on our users really keeping up to speed with red line changes. That's challenging, it's difficult. We want to offer something different. So that is definitely in our work program. You will expect to see something over time, but it won't be delivered this year. Having said that, we are trialing it internally and we can give feedback on how that's going over the next couple of revision rounds.
Thanks very much, Chris. Another question we have that maybe we might direct to Andrew in the first instance and see if anybody else wants to respond to it as well. But what is ASI planning to do to increase the uptake of the growing offer of ASI chain of custody certified metal by the market? Could ASI request its downstream user members to actually purchase ASI metal or make them report how much ASI metal they have procured?
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. That's easy to answer in the sense that ASI isn't planning to do anything to increase the uptake. We see that as up to members and non-members to decide what type of metal they buy. One of the risks that ASI as an organisation has to be mindful of is that we bring together members in a forum where there can be competitors that come together to talk about improving supply chain standards. And whilst we provide the platform to discuss global standards, it's really up to each individual member to make their own decisions on who they buy or sell to. And so that's not something that we see as ASI's responsibility to encourage people, whether they're members or non-members, to purchase ASI material or not.
Thank you, Andrew. Another question we have, keep them coming, please. And maybe we might direct this one to Marika in the first instance. is what active involvement / action is ASI undertaking with regards to emerging due diligence regulations, i.e. The EU corporate sustainability due diligence? How is ASI concretely engaging with this issue aside from just monitoring?
Thank you very much, Sasha, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, so the EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, as well as other relevant legislation such as the proposed Green Claims Directive, are a priority, certainly, for ASI's partnerships work this year. We know that in the CSDDD proposal, it says that companies may refer to suitable industry initiatives or independent third-party verification to support the implementation of their due diligence obligations. So our key partnerships in this area include working closely with European Aluminium on understanding the direction and implications of the directive for the aluminium sector and ASI members, and through our work with European Aluminium, also informing members of the European Parliament of our standard system and achievements so far. We're also actively participating in the ICO Alliance Government Engagement and Policy Working Group, which supports coordination and joint action between ICO members on key policy areas for sustainability systems in the EU and elsewhere. And then finally, we also recently joined the OECD Multi-Stakeholder Steering Group for the Responsible Minerals Implementation Programme. The MSG works closely with the OECD Secretariat, providing guidance and support to operational aspects of the implementation program, which aims to promote the implementation of the OECD due diligence guidance. And of course, our performance standard version 3 have been aligned with the OECD due diligence guidance. So our messaging through these partnerships with these organizations include that, of course, ASI can help entities improve their due diligence processes and conformance with ASI standards gives assurance that processes are in place, but also we have to make sure and communicate that certification is not going to be a replacement for the ongoing corporate due diligence activities by companies. Another message that we want to make clear is that not all certification systems are equally robust, effective, transparent, and impact-oriented. So strict criteria will have to be set by the EU for certification schemes based on existing global definitions of good practice that have been set by, for example, the ICO Alliance and the OECD guidelines. So through these partnerships, the messaging is that existing recognitions by ICO and OECD alignment assessment should be used so that this can be included in the legislation in the future. We understand that it's not finalized yet, so I understand there's a plenary vote coming at the end of May, so we will communicate through our news website and our newsletter when there's more information coming on this future legislation.
Thank you very much. A lot going on in that space. Another question we have from members is a question around science-based target initiative, and so to set science-based targets, is that not a requirement in the ASI Performance Standard 2022? Chris, is that one you'd like to pick up?
Sure thing. Yeah, I'll get very technical on the language. The question is the SBTI-based target not a requirement? So SBTI is a Science-Based Targets Initiative. And if you look at the language in our Performance Standard version 3 from 2022, we talk about 1.5 degree aligned and science-based target. Now, that's not necessarily a target using an SBTI method. And the reason for that is that the Science-Based Targets Initiative, its method for aluminium is not 1.5 aligned, and actually it isn't applicable to all of the entities that ASI engages with and has within its certification scope. So one day we hope that Science-Based Targets Initiative will be using a method that we use, but today that doesn't exist. So what we're doing is we are developing an entity-specific and science-based method for entities to measure their performance against that is 1.5 degree aligned. So no, the standard doesn't currently call for SBTI-based targets, but it does call for science-based targets. And our ultimate aim is that the method that we are currently developing gets, used by Science-Based Targets Initiative. And what we're hearing from them is that that could be likely. But I think, as mentioned by Catherine earlier on, the focus of many initiatives is on the primary industry because that's where the bulk of the emissions lie. ASI's membership, if you look at numbers, is dominated not by the primary industry, but those who use its products. So we're going to need target setting methods that are applicable to entities wherever they sit on the value chain and that incorporate all of their direct and indirect emissions. So if you want to be part of the group that is currently working on that for delivery to the Standards Committee later this year, I encourage you to get involved with the Climate Change Working Group. We need representation from the full value chain, and you'll be part of that method development, which hopefully one day gets incorporated into SBTI.
Thanks, great. Thanks very much, Chris. That was a great plug for more active engagement, which is exactly what we're looking for and opportunities to share with members. Another kind of question here, and I guess it's a good follow-on, is it's good to see that the standards are getting traction. However, we see that there is little demand in the market for ASI chain of custody, particularly because it's limited opportunity to use the logo on products unless the final site is ASI certified, which is not likely for many aluminium customers. Is this something that ASI can continue to develop and bridge the gap, which likely would increase demand and premium? Fiona, is that one that you'd like to start off with?
Yeah, I can start, and then Chris and or Andrew can add in as well. So yes, we are seeing, if you look in the chain of custody data that we publish each year, we look at the data from the previous year, you can see that the supply chain is filling, but it does step down at each stage. We've got sort of 30% of bauxite or something, 20% of sort of refining and then smelting, and then it drops considerably as you get to the downstream. It does take time for supply chains to fill. We see this filling out each year. We're currently collecting the data from 2021, so we'll see how that looks for this year's published data. In terms of the limited opportunity to use logo on products, there's a few dimensions of that. One is there's some products that are never going to have a logo on it. I'm not going to walk into a car showroom and see an ASI swing tag on it. There are some applications where that makes more sense than others. So it's really more a B2B driver than I would say a B2C, business to customer kind of consumer driven market, because even in packaging where we do see some logo or label use happening, often the packaging is one aspect of it, but consumers are just as interested in what the actual product is, what's in the beverage, what's in the material, what's the thing that they're looking to actually consume. I think, though, I mentioned about the claims guide changes. One of the changes that we've made in there is how that actually those end of the supply chain users of aluminium can take forward claims that are passed on to them when there's no further transformation of that material. So that's one of the changes that we've made just in the last month to try and address that. So that's a few points, but I'll pass to Chris and then maybe Andrew might want to add something as well.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. It's interesting where I think ASI is in the development of its standards and itself, right? As mentioned earlier, our raison d'etre is to drive change. It's drive change across the sector. How do we do that? We do that through implementation of the performance standard and by increasing the impact of the standard by revising it. And chain of custody is a kind of mechanism for uptake of that performance standard. It drives that uptake, as Fiona said, upstream. And we've seen that in the fact that 20 to 25% of primary industry is chain of custody certified. That material is flowing through. But I think we recognize, and we're going to have to evolve our thinking, that what is it that members want from chain of custody? Ultimately, they want to be able to make claims. I think that's it. The ability to make claims is the critical element. So linking up the claims to the chain of custody is important. We also need to recognize, I think, and we've heard it from members, that the mass balanced approach that is currently in the chain of custody and will continue to be there to 2027 should be explored. about whether that is meeting the current and future demands of the market. And so I think one of the things that you'll see in the next, towards the next revision period in 2027, is for us to be asking you, the members, what is it that you want from a COC system? Can ASI play a role in that? And how does it drive change at the same time, right? So there's going to be, you will see a kind of a knowledge in gathering process where we start to gather that, I think without any kind of bias. You know, we're coming to this blank. We want to know what the membership wants on the one hand, on the other, we want to be able to drive change. So I think you will see an evolution in that chain of custody approach, but just to reiterate that to 2027, it's a mass balance approach. That version 2 of the chain of custody standard sits there until then. As Fiona mentioned, regular annual updates of the claims guide, though, allows us to add in opportunities for the existing model, starting with packaging, but not limited to packaging. You know, we've had questions around building window systems and things as well. So you can expect to see some of that roll into the next update of the claims guide.
Yeah, maybe if I just add briefly, I think there's a transitionary period that we're in. So whilst there's been a relatively modest uptake so far, I think that the consumers will put more and more pressure as they become more discerning about ESG factors and everything they buy and consume, and it'll take a while to work through the system, through the whole value chain, but I think that will be a big push over the next few years.
Thanks very much, everyone. We have a follow-up from the previous question on the Science-Based Target Initiative, so we might go there next. So apologies, I didn't catch this quick enough, but it's a follow-on from that one, so probably directed to Chris. But in the meantime, as ASI develops science-based targets approach, what method should new members follow?
So if you're engaged in the primary sector, the largest source of emissions, 1.1 billion tonnes for the sector as a whole, about 1.1 billion tonnes from the primary bit. There is a slope, it exists today. There is a method that was based on International Aluminium Institute Mission Possible Partnership data being taken forward by the Centre for Climate Aligned Finance. We're using it as the basis for the method downstream. It exists for the primary sector. So the use of those kind of tools, I would think, in the meantime, for primary is there. For those who are downstream, it would be about using that primary piece as a guide for the procurement of your primary metal. For recycling, there exists, and for semis production, there exist gate-to-gate slopes as well. So I don't think, and time is critical here. There's 15 billion tonnes of emissions left in the sector's budget. And if we're emitting 1 billion tonnes a year, that's 15 years. So delayed action, you know, we shouldn't be delaying action. So I think you can cobble together some methods right now, and I'd encourage people who are certifying to get in touch with us to get access to those. As mentioned earlier on, a method from ASI by the end of this year is what we're aiming for. In the meantime, individual methods exist, and we can certainly find a way through for conformance, I think, around the materiality of your emissions, predominantly on the primary side. So get in touch.
Thanks very much, Chris. So here's a question for Tinelo. What is ASI doing to help members make the most of their membership?
Yes, thank you very much, Sasha. So there's different engagement platforms that we have for members to be able to make the most of their membership. For members on the certifying track, we have Elemental, which is our assurance platform, which enables the certification process. Through Elemental, members can track their progress and assess the levels of conformance to the different applicable criteria. There's also the learning platform, which was mentioned previously, educational. It has specific training on multiple criteria. There's also the opportunity to have specific implementation questions answered by members of the team, because the team is actually very good at presenting ourselves to be asked questions and to be able to answer those questions for members. So we're very approachable. There's also, the fact that we've embarked on this 1,500 days of consultation. the questions are even more valuable to us as a team because we're now able to use them to fine-tune the guidance, as Chris was talking about, to just make sure that members have at their fingertips what they need to certify. For members that are not certifying, engagement is also important for them. It's important for them to be able to keep on top of key information as it relates to the wider sustainability agenda. So for example, we have the 45 minutes webinars where, this is a very good learning tool, as was mentioned previously, with speakers from within and outside of the membership and topics ranging from anything from human rights to decarbonizing shipping. I think we had one late last year on decarbonizing shipping. There's a lot for members to learn and implement, where possible. And we've also talked about the working groups, with the working groups developed around ASI sustainability priorities, so climate change, human rights, nature positive, and circularity, plus the standards benchmarking and harmonization working group. We had a meeting yesterday, and it was interesting to see members, the multi-stakeholder nature of the group coming together to talk about where we should be going in terms of partnerships and what we should be engaging with. Members have the opportunity to learn and also transfer knowledge with these working groups. So we've talked about, people engaging with the standards committee. If you're not able to join in that space, you can be part of the working groups and then bring knowledge. You can share knowledge, you can gain knowledge. It's nice to be in a room with like-minded individuals who will also want to be part of the solution. So while the working groups are not a decision-making body, I think it's important to point that out. It's good practice for consensus building because of the multi-stakeholder composition of the group. There's also experts that are not members, so they bring a viewpoint that is not necessarily a membership viewpoint, and then we're able to, arrive at a solution to a problem together. So I think I've said all that to say that whatever membership class you're part of in ASI, whether you're certifying or not certifying, there is something for you to engage with to get the most of your membership. And if there's anything that, maybe you're thinking about that hasn't been mentioned yet, we're definitely open to talking to you about it, and then just making sure that everybody gets value out of their membership. I think I'm hoping that I've kind of addressed that and talked about the different ways that members can engage, whether they're certifying or not.
No, thank you very much. You have triggered another question. So maybe it's just a very specific one to follow on, which is how can you become part of working groups and join or engage with the Standards Committee?
It's for the working groups, it's very straightforward. Just send me an email. I don't know if my email is going to come up, but it's chinelo@aluminium-stewardship.org. Send an email to me, and then we can put you in the working group that you want to be in. There's information on the website, and yeah, it's all available. Then for the Standards Committee, that's part of our governance process. So we have to hold elections, and it's not as straightforward as joining the working group, which is just sending me an email. You have to be nominated and elected to be part of the Standards Committee.
Thanks very much. And I think that's put in your email address out to everyone. So it should be accessible. Thank you. Maybe a question to Nat. What are areas for members to focus on when they're transitioning to Performance Standard version 3?
That's a great question, because we're really sort of started to begin to identify some of those common conformance gaps for version 3. And I'll say up front that this is particularly important for those entities that are transitioning from version 2 to version 3. So those undergoing a recertification audit. I emphasize this because the requirements have changed, and previous conformance under version 2 doesn't automatically mean conformance under version 3. So some of those common issues that we're seeing relate to public disclosure, the modern slavery statements, greenhouse gas emission reduction plans, and the due diligence requirements for conflict affected and high risk areas. So on the public disclosures, version 3 contains a number of additional disclosures, and the main documents that aren't being disclosed that we're noticing are the responsible sourcing policy, the greenhouse gas emissions pathway and plans, the modern slavery statements, and in some instances, the statement hasn't been prepared. It's been assumed that the existing policies and the existing processes will address this requirement, and they just don't under the new standard. Also, to a lesser extent, we're seeing the mine rehabilitation plans for bauxite mines and human rights policies not being disclosed publicly. So another area causing challenges under version 3 is greenhouse gases, and there's two parts to that. Firstly, where the independent verification of energy and greenhouse emissions data is not suitable. And secondly, that challenge with development of a greenhouse gas emissions plan, which includes the pathways and monitoring the progress against the plans. So commonly those reduction targets are not specified for the intermediate nor that longer term 2050 timeframe. And when those targets are provided, they're not yet demonstrating proper alignment with that 1.5 degree pathway that we're saying. Another aspect is the ecosystem services. This is part of the biodiversity risk assessment, and it's really sort of showing to be a common gap at the moment, where there's reliance on earlier biodiversity assessments to meet these new version 3 requirements. And this one should be an easy one just to fill that gap, because companies, entities already have those risk identification and assessment processes in place. So it's just adding on this additional or extended requirement. And the final one that we're seeing is a need for a focus on risk-based due diligence assessments relating to conflict-affected and high-risk areas. So this is a new requirement of version 3 and commonly not sufficiently addressed. So the first step of that due diligence process is generally completed very well, and it ties in with those existing responsible sourcing requirements that are already there, but it's those additional steps relating to management responses and the annual reporting where there's some insufficiencies there. So that'd be the common aspects or the common gaps that we're seeing at the moment.
Thanks, Nat. That was really comprehensive. I have been asked to plug, in terms of the Standards Committee, we do have one seat that's vacant at the moment for civil society. So if you are a civil society representative and you are interested in the Standards Committee, let us know. There is one spot empty, and we would really like that to be filled to continue the really important work of the Standards Committee. We have one more question, and we're going to have to get through it quickly so that we can finish on time. But the last question, perhaps to Fiona, is, will ASI authorize ASI certified auditors from the listed certification bodies to conduct training sessions for ASI members regarding the ASI performance standard and the ASI chain of custody standards? This would allow local face-to-face training for better understanding the revised standards.
Thanks, Sasha. So in a short answer, probably not, because auditors can't really be giving advice, if you like, or training people and then coming in and assessing conformance against that. So we've certainly done training where auditors and members are involved, but mostly the training is coming for us. We are delivering it online at the moment. We do recognise that sometimes that doesn't suit everybody, but if you've got some particular concerns, please get in touch with us. In some locations and some languages, we know that that's an issue. So translations, as we mentioned up front with Sasha's points, is something that we're also looking into as well. But that auditing role, it becomes a little bit tricky to also be giving advice and then coming in and assessing against it. So that's just one of those principles we need to keep in mind.
Thanks, Fiona. That was great. And I would just like to thank the Secretariat members for participating in that discussion. There were a lot of questions. I think we got through a lot of content and material. So thank you very much for your time, your energy, your passion, and your insights. We are at the very last part of the AGM, and really it's just to me to thank everybody for rich insights and discussion and questions. That was absolutely fantastic. And to say thank you to a lot of people. So I'd like to thank all my fellow board members, I'd like to thank all the staff in the Secretariat. There is a lot of work that goes on into preparing the AGM, but also the ongoing work of the Secretariat, as you can clearly kind of see and hear through the discussion today. I do want to acknowledge one of the multi-talented members of the Secretariat. The music we heard at the very beginning was actually composed by one of our Secretariat members. So thank you for that. I'd also like to thank the translators, because this is a really big job and really important to make sure that we're continuing work to ensure that our activities, our discussions are accessible in as many ways as possible. So the formal business of the AGM is now complete, and I thank you all very much for attending and declare the AGM closed. Thank you.